This month we're talking about service, and I want to start out today with a quote from E.B. White. You may have heard it before, but it's another one of my favorites. If the world were merely seductive, that would be easy. If it were merely challenging, that would be no problem. But I arise in the morning torn between a desire to improve the world and a desire to enjoy the world. This makes it very hard to plan the day. You ever have that? You know, maybe it's not first thing in the morning for you. Maybe it's, I should be living my dreams to my fullest and doing my stuff and creating joy in my own life. And then it's like, oh, but I should be of service in the world. And it's a little, well, it feels like a dichotomy, doesn't it? And even if we're sitting still and thinking, oh, I know there's no, that's all the same thing. I forget that quite frequently. And so I will put myself through the ringer going back and forth between being of service and serving myself or living my life or bringing my own growth and fullness about. And when I tell myself that okay, here's the thing. I have this whole string of excuses why I can't do something to be of service. And I don't use them all at once. And I'm talking about me because I think that I'm quintessentially human in this, meaning that one or more of the things that I'm talking about or capturing about myself probably resonates with you. So I have this whole well, it can be long, this list of reasons why I can't volunteer, hold the door, stretch just a little bit in the direction of kindness, whatever it is. And it's usually, well, it comes down to two things. Me. That's one thing. The trinity of me. Me. Or lack. What do I mean by that? What about me? That's the first one. Everybody gets that, right? Well, who's going to serve me? Well, when do I get my stuff, my time, my love, my whatever? And then the other one is I don't have enough time, money, energy, goodness, kindness, patience, whatever it is. And so I can't give my gifts in this way, or I can't be a greeter or work with the PTA, whatever it is. Now I want to tell you a story about my mom. Wherever she is, I hope she's not mad at me for roasting her like this, because I'm going to... And it's been, I think I've told this story before, but it's been a while. So my mother, she was a member of the Catholic Daughters of America. And she did Meals on Wheels, and she went over to Pittsburgh and served the poor. She did a lot of stuff. And man, was she miserable. Let me give you an illustration of what this might look like. So she goes over the hill to help feed folks, right? Okay, but so she's serving food, and she would serve the food, and then she would watch them to make sure that they didn't waste it. Now, if they were going to waste it, she would go over there and tell them they couldn't have any more. And I was an adult. Now, I'm glad that she modeled service for me. But when I was an adult, I sort of got the wow, she doesn't love doing this at all. And I didn't really understand why she did it all. And then one day she told me in the heat of a disagreement. Well, young lady, I think I've done enough service to earn my chair in heaven. And I was like, oh, there it was. This is an obligation. And you know, so much of, even if it wasn't meant this way, so much of what we've been handed from our Judeo-Christian upbringings, and many of the other traditions do this. I'm not trying to, just say it's Judeo-Christian. But it's like there's this heavy burden of an obligation. It's why we serve. It's why we give. And it's presented to us as if, it's if you do these things, well, then you've, as my mother said, earned your chair in heaven. Or you're somehow pleasing the divine if you do good. And that, to serve in that way is baking a bitter bread. In Hinduism, there is a concept called seva. Y'all heard that word before? Right? And it means selfless service. Or service with no thought of reward. With no thought of reward. And as I've thought about this, now I will tell you that if you go to the heartspacedallas.org website, you will see the spiritual practices that we are ideally practicing, and one of those is service. One of those is service because it's in every tradition there is an element of service, and it's also a hugely important one to me. And y'all have heard me say from here before that some things come more naturally than others. Rodney is a meditator. Not that he doesn't serve, but he has this beautiful practice that he's called to. For me, it's a practice. You see what I'm saying? Well, so this practice of selfless service comes more naturally to some of us than others. For some of us, serving is as easy as breathing. It's just what we do. For others of us, we have to work to get over the stories that we have about how we don't have enough. This, that, or the other thing. And so I'm not certain which group I'm talking to today, maybe a little bit of each. But I do have some good news about that idea of seva, because the thing that I've figured out is that there's no such thing as selfless service. There is no such thing as selfless service. I want to read you a quote from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Though they knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive became secondary. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. They shared their homes, their slender resources, and gladly devoted spare hours to fellow sufferers. Now I want to read you a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. It is one of the most beautiful compensations of this life that no man can sincerely try to help another without helping himself. Albert Schweitzer. I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I know. The ones among you who will be really happy are those that have sought and found how to serve. See, there's something about service itself that gets us out of our own way. I mean, we're human beings. One of the biggest gifts in the universe that we have is that we are spirit aware of itself. So we have the capacity for self-awareness. That makes sense to everybody? Right? Not every species can turn around and see itself seeing itself. The problem, challenge, opportunity with that is that self-aware at certain parts of the journey easily tips over into self-obsession. Self-awareness is awesome. Self-obsession is, ooh, Lord, it wears me out. That's what I want to tell y'all. And it's like, there's a quote that says, and I don't know who said this, it's not that we should think less of ourselves, it's that we should think about ourselves less. What am I saying? All of this is meant to say that it is the act of serving the world that gets us out of our own way. The biggest burden we have is the obsessive thoughts that we have about ourselves and our enoughness or our value. Now, this may not be true for everybody, but close your eyes a second. Is this true for you? Raise your hand. Yeah, about 50% of y'all are willing to admit it. And so what I want to suggest is that we engage in service as a spiritual practice for ourselves. For ourselves. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, we ought to get our bloated nothingness out of the way of the divine circuits. There's a correlate for that in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the correlate is, and this is not officially sanctioned big book of AA literature. This is just something that was beat into my head by my sponsor over and over and over again. God doesn't need your help. God doesn't even need you to do the 12 steps. God needs you to get yourself out of the way so God can work your life. Getting myself out of the way, my bloated nothingness out of the way of the divine circuits. Busying myself with the 12 steps and service so that miracles can happen. So service has this beautiful gift that it gives us of relieving that sense of self-obsession. But I want to mention one other thing in last Sunday I left here and I went home and my sweet boy dog, he died unexpectedly. And God, I love that dog. And when confronted with this profound sense of loss, that in the grand scheme of things is, he's a dog. Something very human in me wants to know why I bother. What's it all for? And so Monday, I called 3 people and I said, is there anything I can do for you today? Not to avoid my feelings, because they're unavoidable, but because I needed to remember that there is a greater purpose that love is happening. Life is happening. Kindness is happening. Generosity is happening. That's what service does. It connects us with something that in the final analysis, we don't have to ask ourselves, what was my purpose? Why was I here? What did I matter? That it's enough that the help we extended, the smiles we gave, the hugs we were present for, that all of those things furthered the purpose of love on planet Earth. Ernest Holmes said, life is ever giving of itself. We must receive, utilize, and extend the gift. And so remember when I said at the very beginning that it doesn't matter. You can't score points with God for being of service. But if the essence of God, if the essence of love is self-givingness, then what you can do is be God. Be God. That is something worth dedicating your life to. That's worth standing at the door, sitting on the board, joining the PTA. Ultimately, you might be the most conscious, loving person in the room, even if it feels like a crappy way to spend an hour. I want to use this quote again. I used it a couple of weeks ago, and this is a very rare thing for me to do, but it really spoke to me today. So I'm going to read you this, say a few more things, and then if Brad is listening, I'm going to need him because we're going to pray. This is a quote from Stephen Cope. If you don't find some way to give your gift, you will, in the very best case, dedicate your life to the perfection of yourself, to the perfection of your health, intelligence, beauty, home, or even spiritual prowess. And the problem is simply this. This self-dedication is too small a work, and it inevitably becomes a prison. So let's just remember that we're the heart, the hands, the voice of Spirit. Whatever that looks like. Whether it takes 30 seconds or a couple of hours a week. And that the gift of giving yourself, true to form, true to universal law, becomes the biggest gift you receive. Let's pray. Oh, I'm so grateful to know that I know, in this moment anyway, that life is moving in as and through me, and that as I give, I receive. Not because God expects it, but because I choose it. And mostly what I'm grateful for this moment is to be enough, to know enough, to love enough, to praise enough and worship enough and work enough and be enough. I'm deeply grateful for the ability to serve, for the call to serve, in my perfectly imperfect ways. And if this is true about me, that I am perfectly imperfect and enough, then it must be true of all life everywhere, at least in this one very moment. For a house divided against itself cannot stand, and there cannot be two opposing truths. There cannot be an exception to this universal law. It's just true. And I'm grateful in this moment that I have the capacity to remind us that it's true, because that gives me the capacity to know it's true for me. And so in the spirit of giving and receiving, I simply say thank you. Thank you, God. Thank you, Heart Space. Thank you, life. And so it is.